The title today differs slightly from the advertised title. I'm not claiming to give good talks myself. I just want to share with you some things I've learned on presentations. So about 5 years ago, I used to think I gave good presentations. I was fairly convinced from all the feedback I received that I was doing a good job. When I went to a conference and gave a talk, I would ask occasionally people, how did the talk go? And they would say, oh, it was good. Do you have any feedback? No, it was good. And without any other information, one would conclude naturally that you give good talks. However, about 5 years ago, I was lucky enough to be shortlisted for an ERC starting grant, and the German government very kindly sent me to a presentation training course along with the other 20 or so candidates from Germany. And there I learned that in fact I do not give good presentations. So the format of the day is very interesting, and if you ever have the opportunity to do this, then I strongly recommend that you partake in such an event. All 20 of us were invited to deliver our presentation for the final defense of the grant, and then in the time following the presentation, we were given the opportunity to give open criticism on every aspect of the presentation. And I mean every aspect. The way you stood, the way you spoke, the way you designed the slides, the way you structured your presentation. Everything was subject to criticism. And this was the first time in my life that I'd ever received proper criticism on a presentation. And immediately I learned, of course, that I'd done everything possible wrong. And so after that, I redesigned completely the presentation. And since then, I've actually developed a keen interest in what it takes to give a good presentation. Now, it's a learning process. I don't claim to give good presentations. As I said at the beginning, myself, I just learn. I like to learn. I find it very interesting how to give a presentation. What is it that the good speakers do that makes it separates them from the bad speakers? And I want to share with you today some hints and tips, guides and rules that I've learned over the past 5 years, on this subject. So to begin, let me just ask a question, namely, why should we give good talks at all? Maybe there's no point in giving a good talk. Maybe it's a useless annoyance in your everyday life. Well, I claim that that's not the case, and in fact, giving a good talk is important. Presentations are vitally important to our scientific endeavors. That's a point I'm going to make in the next couple of minutes. In fact, I'm going to make an even more stronger claim, one that's perhaps controversial, but one that I come to believe as the years go by, namely that presentations are in fact more important than publications. Now, I've supplied for you now some purely unscientific empirical data I've collected over the past decade to support this statement. So when you submit a paper to the archive, and I presume everyone here will at some point in their lives at least hit the submit button to the archive, and for this paper you spent 3-4 months working on, maybe 6 months. You submit it to the archive, and the next day you receive some emails, and those emails invariably say, you forgot to cite me. Does that mean that anyone's actually read that paper? No, I don't think so. In my experience, my purely unscientific experience, I claim that the average number of people that would read, as in read every single word of a paper that I personally have written, is actually 0. I don't think there exists a paper that I've written that has had more than 0 people read it. I mean, maybe 1 person or two people, like the poor PhD student who I made read the paper. But if you think about your own experience in reading papers, I'm sure you know the feeling. You download the paper, you look at the abstract, you just immediately go to the bibliography to see if they cited you, of course, and then you skim through the paper, maybe you read the captions of the figures, and that's the end of that. So you may disagree with this number, maybe this number's 1 or 2 or even 5, but on average, my experience is that it's about 0, actually, as in the number of people who've read every single word of your paper. Of course, there are people who skim papers all the time. However, in the past decade of giving talks and presentations at institutes and conferences and workshops, the average number of people that I tend to see sitting in the audience is a somewhat larger number. It's a whole order of magnitude larger. It's about 10. That's purely unscientific data that I present to you today, gathered completely without any regards to scientific rigor. But this is my gut feeling for how many people would tend to be in an audience. And if I look around today, I see approximately 10 people. 15, actually. Now that's 10 warm bodies, 10 people who are going to, if you're lucky, listen to every single word that you say. And that's an opportunity you can't afford to pass up. This is your only chance, in fact, to communicate your ideas, your agenda, what you find important and interesting. So given that, admittedly unscientific data that I've collected, it's kind of amazing that 95% of presentations actually suck. Given those numbers, this is completely out of proportion to the way I think things should be. Now, I don't just say that, Guy Kawasaki says that. Now, he's one of these internet gurus, but if I had to say, I would say something closer to 96 or 97 or maybe even 99% of presentations suck. If I think of going to the workshop that I went to a couple of weeks ago, it was almost all the presentations that suck. So maybe this is a problem that we can't solve. Maybe we cannot do good presentations. Maybe it's very hard. Maybe that's why presentations tend to suck. Well, actually, I claim that that's completely not the case. On the contrary, good public speaking is actually a learnable skill. You can learn it like you can learn riding a bike. You can learn it like learning to play a musical instrument. It's a learnable skill that you can acquire and improve. And even better, and this should concern almost everyone in the graduating colleague here today, it's a transferable skill. Now this should be of primary interest to you because not all of you will have a career in academia. This is a simple fact of numbers. Not everyone here will become a professor. So you want to spend your time learning skills that are transferable to the wider world. And public speaking is one of the core skills that you can employ in almost every walk of life in the world. As you get older, you may get a job in a company where you're asked to review a product to your manager. You'll have to do so in front of a team. You'll use the skills of public speaking there. Suppose you don't want to become employed. Suppose you want to learn a musical instrument and play. Then you'll still have to employ the skills of public speaking when you have a concert. Suppose you just participate in your local children's parent-teacher council. You will be asked to report on something that happened in the class. Public speaking, again, is a core skill that you will employ in that context. And finally, when your children get married, you'll have to have the speech. Again, public speaking is a skill that will reward you for the rest of your life. It's a transferable and learnable skill. So hopefully now I've at least made it plausible that giving a good presentation is something you should spend some time on. Well, that's great. So I can just stop here and say, go do good presentations. But, of course, what you really want to hear about is how. Now, I don't know the magic tricks, personally. I've experienced some harsh criticisms. I've tried to learn from them. I've watched videos of good public speakers from Steve Jobs and so on, and tried to learn what are the tricks that they're using, tried to observe. And I try and use these tricks myself without, it's hard. And you'll see as I tell you as we go through, that some of these things are excruciatingly difficult. They are so difficult that you almost can't do it. But it's worth pursuing. So let me start by giving you an overview of what you should think of before you even begin your presentation. Now, before you begin a presentation, preparing a presentation, the first thing that you should contemplate when preparing a presentation, before your mouse cursor hits the first PowerPoint slide, you should sit down and think, why? You start your presentation with the question, why? This is the most important thing that the audience wants to know. If you start with what, if you start with a thing, this is a device. This device does X. How does it do it? Well, it uses the Higgs boson effect to do this effect. Why are we studying this device? Well, because often people get lost when you present information about a thing or an idea if you don't explain why you're saying this to them? Why is the question that comes up most in your mind when you're confused and lost in a talk? Why do I care about this definition? Start with why when contemplating any presentation. So how do you start with why? What's the why of a presentation? Well, to do that, you really have to think a little bit more about what you want to say, and that is you have to find your message. What's the message of your presentation? This is a question you should contemplate when you begin to think about designing the presentation. Because the thing is, if you just think to your own experience in talks, when you walk out of the room, there's not much room in your brain, right? You don't get to carry all 46 slides of the presentation in your head from the speaker. If you're lucky, you might remember one thing, right? Now, if you're the person giving the presentation, do you want that one thing that people remember to be, oh boy, that was a boring talk? Have you thought that ever in a presentation as you walked out the door? That was a boring talk. That was the take-home message of the talk, that it was boring. Do you want that to be your message in your presentation? No. So what you want to do is find out what that message is. And that becomes, and this is why living in Germany is such a great thing, you have an expression for this. That becomes der rote Faden for your presentation, that one message. That's all you get. You only get one. I know you want to have 2 messages in your presentation, or even 5. Just cut the second one, or the third and the fourth. Stick with one message. That's all you've got. That's the audience's patience will extend to one message, if you're lucky. Now that becomes the rote Faden for your presentation, the red thread throughout the whole presentation. You should refer to it at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And hopefully, if you are lucky and you did a good job, they will remember it. Now, once you've thought about your message, and that should inform you now how to answer the question, why does the audience have to sit there listening to you? We have to contemplate how to go on from there. And the structure of a presentation, at least as empirically observed by some people, the structure of good presentations tends to follow a format that may be a bit counterintuitive when you yourself prepare a presentation. So a way to proceed that many excellent public speakers employ is they start with why, they proceed to explaining how, and then they finally conclude with the what. So if you think that you want to have these questions in your mind in that order when preparing your presentation, then that would be a good way to structure, I would propose, a good presentation. Start with why, proceed to how, and conclude with what, whatever that is in your context. Now, I like this plot of the complexity of a presentation as time progresses. Now, if you start with why, you want to, what I've got here on the x-axis is time, how long the presentation has proceeded for, and on the y-axis here I've got like the complexity or the specificness or the difficulty of the subject matter. And here I've plotted this black line here is in my opinion, an ideal presentation, right? As time progresses, you start simple, you get more specific and complicated at some peak in the middle. I don't know, maybe it's over there, wherever the climax occurs. And then as you come to the end of the presentation, you start to zoom out and become more general and simple. And that will allow you to give the big picture towards the end of your talk and hopefully conclude with the same message that you started with, your message. And throughout, the red thread is woven into your talk. If what you're saying has nothing to do with the red thread, then throw it out. And as time progresses, you have this picture I was taught in presentation training courses to zoom in as time progresses, then zoom out. So just think of that when you structure your presentation. So I would certainly recommend sketching on a piece of paper before you even begin producing slides. You write down the time axis. Write down some topics that you think are important and sort them out in order of specificness before you start to create visual aids. Now I want to say a couple more general things that you should contemplate before you even begin constructing your presentation. So there's three questions I want you to think about. I think it's vital to think about these questions before you ever start a presentation. Question number 1 is what is your audience? it's vital. Know your audience before you begin a presentation. And you do know this. You almost always know this. You've been invited to a conference, look at the list of attendance, or the other speakers if you don't have a participant list. You've been asked to give a lecture on something. Well, what's the average level of the student? You have been asked to give a popular science talk to the general public. Well, you know it's the general public. Know your audience. And this is extremely important because it sets the tone and the language of what you're going to say. It's completely inappropriate to go to a conference of chemists and to proceed with theorems and definitions using pure mathematics language. And conversely, if you went to a mathematics audience and you proceeded to give a presentation using intuitionistic reasoning, you might not receive such a warm welcome. So I'll give you some guides about how to know your audience and how that can allow you to adapt your language. So, for example, if you go to a physics conference or you have an audience of physicists, the mode of communication that's accepted amongst the physics community tends to be a stream of consciousness type mode of communication. Not always, but check the community out. Look at other talks on YouTube from people who've gone to similar conferences. That should inform you how people expect you to behave. However, if you go to a conference of mathematicians, they're probably going to want you to write down definitions and theorems, and that's reasonable. That's the language that they use. It's a matter of respect, really. Do you want to go there and just be like some kind of unpleasant person who doesn't obey the social norms in the group? It's worth, you just contemplate this before you even begin, right? It sets the language. Secondly, know your context. This is another question. What is the context of the talk? Is it going to be a talk in a room like this? Are you going to be outside? Are you going to be inside? Are you going to be in a well-lit room, a poorly lit room? You usually know this information before you begin. Will you be allowed to use PowerPoint at all? Will you be even allowed to use your own computer? This often doesn't happen. You have to supply PDFs. Or must you use a blackboard? Will there be a blackboard? These are very important questions because it actually affects fundamentally the visual aids you're going to design. It's worth thinking about. It takes 10 minutes to learn this information usually. You can find out the room where your talk is usually online, right? You just look at the room plan. And as I said, the context determines what also the objective of your presentation is to some extent. So if you're giving a lecture, the primary goal of a lecture is to transfer information, and a lot of it, right? You know, it's not like there's one idea I want to tell you about. Usually you have to go through some laws of physics and write them down and do some examples, and etc., etc. However, in a talk has a different kind of objective. Often it's just to advertise an idea, or advertise your work, or communicate, or transfer an idea. So the context determines even the content of a presentation. And finally, the third question you should think about is the medium. You know, I mentioned before the context, will you have access to PowerPoint? Will you have access to a blackboard? Well, if you have access to multiple modes of delivery, which one should you choose? And again, that's determined by the audience, and it's determined by the context. So to give you an example, if you have to transfer information, and a lot of it, like definitions, theorems, and proofs, and so on, personally, I think it's hard to beat a blackboard. A blackboard is a great thing. It slows you down, it makes you talk at the right rate, it allows you to transfer information in a way that the students can keep up with as you proceed through the lecture. If you try and simulate a blackboard with PowerPoint, then that's not so nice. Conversely, if your aim is to advertise or transfer some ideas, maybe not so much content, but more soft content, then PowerPoint is pretty unbeatable. You can put pictures in, and sometimes you can use sound and animations if it's appropriate. All right, I think these are the considerations that are really worth contemplating before you begin. Just get that information, have it clear in your mind. What are these context, audience, medium? What's your message? Start with why. This is the broad stuff to start with. And then we get to now the topic of, say, designing a presentation, of designing visual aids. And then we come to one of the golden rules, which I think is worth keeping in mind always. Namely, you can either read or you can listen, but you cannot do both. Maybe you are a lucky soul who can actually read and listen at the same time. I'm not one of those lucky souls. I don't know how many of you are, but just bet on the audience not being able to read and listen at the same time. And that, if you think about this for a bit, you realize that this has a dramatic consequence for how you design your visual aids. If you want the audience to listen to the things you are saying, then there had better not be information on the board. Or if there is information, you must have given them time to read it. Now, we were taught in England, when I did teacher training in England, we were taught the following rule. When you're giving a lecture, you're writing on the board, this is in the context of a Blackboard presentation, and you don't speak, you just write. And you turn around and you look at the pens of the students, and when the last pen drops, that's what they say, when the last pen drops, you can talk. It's extremely hard to implement this. Because, I'll tell you why. It's because you have to stand there silently in front of people. I can do it for about 30 seconds before I crack. It's very painful. So it's hard to follow this rule of not talking when people are reading or writing, but it's a vital one, and it should inform how you design your visual aids. So in any event, in view of this golden rule, it seems logical, I think, that you should minimize visual noise and prefer simplicity. You don't want to add all this extra information that actually doesn't have anything to do with what you're saying. Because the human eye is going to just look all over the board at all the things you put there and not listen to you. And to that end, I highly recommend beginning with a color scheme for a slide. Now, the thing is, like, there are professionals out there who've solved these problems. These are solvable problems, color schemes and good design. There exist websites called colorschemechooser.com. Go there, click on it, choose one you like, use it. People have solved these problems. It's easy, and you can use what they tell you. Now, I want to give you a little case study of what not to do. Now, this is, I mean, it's easy to pick on the mathematicians, and I'm sorry for doing so. I've taken a slide from the wild. This is a real slide from a conference, not one I've been to, but a partner conference to one I've been to. So I've seen many talks like this. And here's a way to violate all the rules at once in slide design. So here it is. This is a slide that really appeared in a real presentation near the beginning. It's actually slide number 2. You know, I don't know what you think when you see a slide like that, but this is what I think. I'm just overwhelmed by the visual noise of that slide. And let me just summarize all the things that I feel are completely wrong about this slide. Right? So first of all, let's start down here. Here's a common thing you'll see in slide design. This is the presenter's name. Well, I know your name. I looked in the program before I came. Why is that there? The second one, look at this. The name of the conference is there. Like, I know where I am. I registered for the conference. I paid my money. I know where I am. Definitions and some examples. Well, okay, but if you have definitions, then why tell it to us twice? I mean, this slide is lovely though. Look, theorem, that's not even a definition. What's it doing there? And on the left here is the list of topics in the talk. That means every single damn slide, my eyes are going to flick to this list of topics, and I'm going to go, oh, we're only at the examples bit. And then, my absolute pet hate of all is the slide counter. Yeah. Oh no, I'm at 2 of 1,032 slides. How long is this hell going to continue for? So if you look at this slide and you ask yourself, what is it that they wanted to do on this slide? Well, they wanted to talk about definitions. So where are the definitions on this slide? Well, there's actually here, and you can cross out all this useless information, and you realize that there's only about 11 words that needed to be on that slide. I won't go into what this actually is, but I claim that in the audience that they were talking to, this would have been enough to have types of actions, blah, 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 blah. That would have been enough. And then in a separate slide, talk about the examples. Now, this is a very common thing. I see this a lot in mathematics conferences. I also see it, unfortunately, a lot in physics conferences, but in a different context. Personally, I don't like Beamer. This is done with Beamer, this LaTeX package, because it invites this style of slide design. But you can use it how you want. And oh yeah, the final thing, look at this, the color scheme here, it's lurid. I mean, okay, everyone has their personal choice, but we were taught that blue and green should never be seen unless there's a color in between. All right, to the end of, let's discuss a little bit more slide design. Now, here's a golden rule I think you should also keep in mind when designing slides. This is important in your future life anyway. Now, bullet hierarchies are a natural thing to want to do when you design a slide. Because when you design a slide, you're sitting there by yourself in front of a computer or on whatever, a piece of paper, and you're thinking what has got to be said at this point. And what it turns out is going on is you're thinking about the slide and what you're going to say, and you're writing down, when you create bullet hierarchies, you're actually writing down your speaker notes on the slide. That's what a bullet hierarchy often is. It's often a way for the speaker to remember what to say at that point. If you find yourself constructing bullet hierarchies, print it out on a piece of paper, keep the piece of paper with you, put it on the desk, and that's actually your speaker notes for the presentation, and then redesign the slide. All right, given that I claim that presentations are extremely important, let's make another simple statement. I think you really should prepare a presentation. I mean, if it's important, then you should spend time on it. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been to conferences where the speaker proudly leapt onto the stage and said, I prepared this presentation on the plane flying over. I didn't have internet, that's why I'm not going to include any citations. Oops. Now, what does that say to the audience? It says, dear audience, I do not care. Similarly, if you don't prepare, if you don't do a good job preparing, what you're saying to the audience is, I don't care. I'm going to waste your time. And to that end, we come to another of the golden rules, which you just saw before. Never, 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 ever go over time. And I'm going to break this rule today. You know, it's very embarrassing. I'm sorry about that.
There was no time limit.
Yeah, I know, but I am keen. I can see the clock. Now, this is a golden rule. Because what you are saying, again, when you go over time, is every minute I wasted my time going over time, I waste 15 personal minutes. I'm telling you, every minute I'm going over, that my time is 15 times more valuable than your time. And have you ever walked out of a talk that went over time and thought, gee, that was really great that they went over time? Giancarlo Rorta says that every minute you go over time, another half of the audience starts to fantasize about you falling through the floor. And in my experience, I can't disagree. All right, these are some golden rules. Now let's get onto some aspects of delivering a presentation. How should you talk in a presentation? Okay, here's some simple guidelines that are impossible to follow, but I will tell you them anyway, because I was taught them, and you have to practice and practice and practice and practice, and it's hard and it's painful. Number one, stand straight. You know, like these people are like, yeah, that's right. And then I was thinking about this theorem, and then I prove this theorem. They look over here, and they're moving around. They start looking at the lights on the ceiling. This is visual noise, right? What are you looking? You're not looking at their presentation, you're not even listening to them, you're looking at the curious way in which they walk around the room in a figure of 8 all the time. You know, some of them gallop, I've seen people do this. And then you've got to stand straight. I've seen it all. And it's a simple piece of advice, but it's extraordinarily difficult to follow. The only thing I can say is I've practiced this and practiced this and practiced this over 5 years. I don't do it very well, I know. But you just practice standing in a room with no one to begin with. Just standing. It's hard, right? It actually belongs to move. And on the topic of standing straight, you stand straight, and what I was taught in this presentation training course is the placement of your hands is also very important when you give a presentation. Some people do this when they give a presentation. Other people do this, right? Now, I'm no expert on body language, I know very little about it, but what I was taught is things like this create a sort of standoffish feeling. if you put your hands behind your back and your pockets, then that's a bit of insecurity. What do other people do? There's all manner of ways people put their hands, because you've got to put them somewhere, right? Well, you put them here. That's where you put them. It doesn't look weird. Well, I hope it doesn't look too weird. That's where you put the hands. That's what we were told. Practice it. You can learn this skill. It's hard. Professional musicians learn this skill. They stand on stage and they don't move when it's important for them not to move. Next one, make eye contact. So we're social animals, humans are. You want to make sure that you have a connection with your audience, that they think that you're talking to them and not your presentation remote. And when I say make eye contact, I mean make eye contact with everybody. Not with that poor soul you've decided to fixate your gaze on for the entire hour. Make sure you look at everybody. Nextly, on movements, how should you move in a talk? It's ridiculous to stand still the whole time. And by standing still, I don't mean that you have to actually stand still the whole time. But if you're going to make a movement, make sure it has a beginning and an end. You're allowed to walk across the room. If you want to emphasize a point, you can walk into the audience as long as there's a well-defined beginning and an end. That's fine. That's what we were told. And in my experience, that seems to be right. If you're going to make a move, just make sure it has a beginning and an end. So unfocused movement like this, the elbows pinned to the body, waving your arms continuously, again, is a kind of visual noise. Okay, do I even need to say this? Speak clearly. Again, it's a learnable skill. Go to an empty room, or get your friend to go right at the back of the room and start talking. If they cannot hear you, you are not speaking clearly. If you can speak fast. I'm not a fan of the speak slowly style of presentations. If you want to convince someone of a point, sometimes it's a good sales trick to speak fast. But know why you're speaking fast or slow. Also, if you're giving a Blackboard presentation, do I need to say it? Write clearly. This is a learnable skill. Go to an empty lecture theatre, pick up a piece of chalk, start writing. Walk to the back of the room. Does it look neat? No. Okay, repeat. You can learn this skill. It's learnable. Now, here's what I consider another really fundamental aspect of a great presentation. Be interested. This is not a typo. I'm not saying be interesting. I'm just saying be interested in what you are saying. Now, the number of times you go to a presentation or a talk or a lecture and the lecturer delivers it in a monotone. Yes, the inertial mass of this body was determined to be 1 Newton. And the whole lecture proceeds in a monotone. And you're like, this guy's not even interested in what they're saying. What happened? Where did the fire go? I mean, every one of you here, I presume, got into academia because some part of it interested you. Communicate that enthusiasm. You're allowed to be interested in a scientific talk. You can be impartially interested in something. That's allowed. I find it absolutely fascinating when I first met this idea, because, and then you launch off in sentences like that. When you are interested in something, humans, they tend to be interested in that thing as well. That's the beauty of it. So you don't have to be interesting, you just have to be interested. And so if you start talking with great excitement about an idea, everyone's like, well, actually, I never thought about it, but that is indeed rather interesting. It's a core requirement of a really cool talk. Now, oh yeah, and on that topic, just finally on that topic, we were taught to have the twinkle in the eye. So when you talk about something really that you enjoy, you have a little twinkle in the eye. I don't know how to communicate how to do that, but just imagine that you have a little twinkle in your eye when you're talking about something, and that can give you that final oomph to make yourself look interested in something. All right, we're getting to the end of the talk, and at the end of a talk, one encounters questions. How do we deal with questions? A lot of people are worried by questions. Questions are scary things, because that's where the audience bites back. How do you deal with questions? So I'm going to give you some really simple tips that can just make your life easier when answering questions. Number one, and there's two reasons for this, always repeat the question. So if someone asks you about something, try and word for word reproduce what that was. Now, there's a practical reason for doing this. The first one is that the audience may not have heard the question. Very often that happens, right? You're sitting at the back, they're sitting at the front, you don't know what they asked. Pure practical reason. But there's a second and arguably more important reason. And that is, it gives you time to think. Now, you often hear people immediately launching after they've been given a question into verbal diarrhea. Blah, 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 blah. They don't, the answer has nothing to do with the question. And I claim that they could have helped themselves to answer the question simply by repeating the question. This also goes for interview situations as well. In an interview, you're nervous, it's hard to listen. Repeating the question always gives you that time to think and to also give your brain a second chance to even listen to what the question was. And here's another one, a tip from the pros. When you get asked a question, don't take a step backward, don't stand still, take a step forward to the person who asked the question. Just one, doesn't have to be an aggressive step. What you're doing is you create a connection with the person asking the question. If someone asks you the question and you go like this, that communicates fear. Or if you stand still, then it's like, it almost implies that you're thinking, you don't know what's going on. As I said, I'm not an expert on body language, but this tip seems to work well in practice. Finally, I've given you all these rules and guides and tips and so on. But one of the rules is you should break the rules, but know why. So if you really want to use a crazy color scheme, then maybe there's a reason why. Maybe you want to actually offend the audience on that slide. That's a thing you might want to do. Maybe you want to go over time. Maybe there's a reason for that. But I don't know one. But if you're going to break the rule, and I invite you to break every rule that I've told you, I think none of these are the rules. Then just at least ask yourself why. Why am I breaking this rule? Am I breaking it because I'm lazy? I mean, that is an answer. I'm a lazy person. I don't feel like spending more than 10 minutes on the presentation, therefore I'm going to break the rules. Okay, fine. Now you know why. Let's get on with it. Alright. Well, we're reaching the end now. I want to start zooming out and summarizing the structure of a presentation, just again to emphasize the core structure of what a presentation, a good one, seems to comprise. As time passes, you should begin at the beginning with the question why. You should zoom in as time passes, get more specific, start answering the question how. And then as you zoom out again, and the what is somewhere buried in here as well. As you zoom out, you become more and more general, and you try and zoom back out to the beginning of your talk, which was the message that you agreed on at the beginning. And on the last slide, and this is the most important slide in any presentation, you have that take-home message. Now, a common last slide that you will see in conferences, almost universally, is one of two types. One is thanking the list of grant bodies that supported that work. Now, that slide is telling the audience, I'm such an important person. I get funded by lots of people. Maybe that is your take-home message. Actually, that can very often be your take-home message in certain contexts, that I'm such a tremendously successful person. Or the other one is thank you for listening. Now, both of those are, I claim, they're not optimal last slides for a presentation. Why is this important? Because this is the slide that's left projected on the screen when question time begins. Often people use that last slide to ask their questions. What do you want them to ask you questions about? What's important for the audience to remember as they walk out of the room? That should be on the last slide. Of course you should thank the audience for listening, but say it in words. Of course you should thank your grant, the grant bodies that funded your work, but that should be on the first slide. So the last slide has to contain, I would argue, the take-home message. And with that, we come to my last slide, which is that to give a better talk, you should practice. It's essential to practice. You should reflect. So if you get feedback, actually take the damn feedback instead of just saying, oh, that was stupid. And you should revise, change your talk, And then I claim you will be on the path to learning better presentations. Thank you very much.